In North America, animals are protected under animal welfare laws, but American lawyer Stephen Wise hopes to change that and get the law to see animals as persons. Legendary documentary filmmakers D.A. Pennebaker and Chris Hegedus chronicle his efforts in their new film, and we're pleased to welcome them to TVO. Chris Hegedus is co-director and producer of Unlocking the Cage, and D.A. Pennebaker is co-director of Unlocking the Cage. Welcome.
Thank you.
Before we start our conversation, I just wanted to show a clip from the film.
These animals are extraordinarily cognitively complex. They have their own cultures. They're self-conscious, autonomous, and self-determining. They have a theory of mind so that they not only know that they have a mind, but they know others have a mind. They understand that they're individuals who existed yesterday and will exist tomorrow, because when you imprison a chimpanzee, the chimpanzee understands that tomorrow he's going to be in prison. And as far as he knows, it's not going to end. What we're trying to do is change the way people view non-human animals. Because right now, the line between human beings and non-human animals is at an irrational place. It's, are you a human? You have rights. You're not a human? You don't. And we're saying that's wrong.
Chris, can you tell me more about Stephen and his story?
Well, Stephen is the head of and founder of the Non-Human Rights Project, which is the only organization that's trying to fight for actual rights for animals. He started 30 years ago. He read a book by Peter Singer, which was about how animals are treated. It opened his eyes, and he immediately changed his law practice to wanting to protect and defend animals. And through the 30-year process of doing it, he realized that animal welfare laws and federal restrictions were just not protecting them enough. There were too many loopholes, and he felt that the only way was to change their status from being a thing and property to being some kind of legal person and having a right, such as the right not to be abused and kept in isolation.
And how did you hear about him?
We heard about him from a friend, and Steve came into the office and told us what he was going to do. We knew very little about legal rights for animals at that point, and when he described that he wanted to make an animal a legal person, we thought it was kind of a novel idea, intriguing, but we didn't really know what it meant. And he was just about to start. It sounded like something that we wanted to follow. And when you start these films, you want to be there at the beginning with somebody, and somebody who is entirely passionate about what they want to do and taking a big risk. And that was what Steve was doing.
Were you passionate about the topic of the document?
Yeah. Well, I was passionate as you be behind, behind these films, in a person who believed that strongly in helping animals and protecting animals, and who himself was a lawyer and understood the nature of the law.
And passion is one thing, but when you meet somebody like Stephen, who is focused so much and is dedicated so much of his life to one issue, what do you learn from a person like that?
In many of our films, we learn from our characters, and I think, from Steve, it was, just staying true to something that he believed in. When he started doing these cases, he would walk into a courtroom and people would bark at him. And
like a seal.
Like a seal, or like a dog. He would be trying to defend, a dog that, bit somebody and was going to be killed. And when he would go into the court to defend it, that was the type of reaction he got as a lawyer. And then through the years, as he developed his case and decided to do this very risky thing of really trying to figure out how to argue that an animal can be a legal person. And in the course of history, there have been many persons that were not human beings. There's corporations, there's ships, there's states,
Even black people in the States for a
And
while.
yes,
right.
and many people were not human. There were slaves, there were women, there were children, Native Americans. So, in the law, there's a whole history of arguing, that another entity should have the right to be a legal person.
But would achieving personhood status change things for these animals?
Well, it would change things in a way that if you imagine if when children were born and they were they had some terrible disease or you can't kill them, you can't do away with them. They're protected by law automatically just by being persons. If you could somehow put that idea into action with certain animals that have a very high cognitive level, like a chimpanzee has a DNA almost the same as we do.
Is that why he focused on chimpanzees?
Well, he wanted animals that obviously that you realize were worth dealing with, saving. He wasn't trying to extend it to all animals. And when somebody asked him if that would happen, he said, "We'll see." Mm-hmm. His thing was that chimpanzee, you have to keep them in a cage because they're dangerous. So, and they live to be 60, 65 years old. So it meant you have to imprison them their whole lives. And for a creature who has almost the same intelligence as a person, that seemed to him inhumane and unjust. And he set himself to offset that.
And do you think he's making a scientific argument then?
Yeah, I mean, his arguments are based on science, and the reason that he chose chimpanzees was because they are like us in so many ways. I mean, the other animal categories that he's looking at are elephants and cetaceans, which are the, whales, orcas. All of those animals have been highly studied in terms of their cognitive capabilities, and he felt that that was the easiest first step to go forward in a case, was to make arguments in terms of equality and why they should also have rights, that they're autonomous beings. And one of the things that the law protects most is one's autonomy.
And he's tried many cases. What's happened so far?
Well,
you have to see the film.
Yeah, I mean, they're ongoing cases. All of them. And, what's interesting is that he got so much further in the law than he ever thought he would. And, the decisions from the 3 different cases that he's done for 3 different plaintiffs are wildly different decisions in the law. And what he's going to try to do is kind of just chip at those decisions and prove that their decisions are wrong and keep appealing and appealing until at some point I think a judge will decide that a chimpanzee should have a legal right.
But why give chimpanzee personhood rights instead of improving animal welfare laws?
Because animal welfare laws don't always work. And in a lot of states, they're laughed at. People have dog fights and they pay off people, and it's not illegal, really. It's just, it's kind of unfair or maybe cruel, but to actually make it illegal is complicated in many states. They don't have the common law that make it possible.
Mm-hmm. On one side, people are arguing that animals aren't cognitively complex like we humans are. How do you respond to those concerns?
I mean, I think one of the great things, and actually here in Canada, we visited a sanctuary fauna right outside of Montreal that recently took in 2 of the chimpanzees that were the first ever to be taught how to use American Sign Language. And actually one of the chimpanzees taught American Sign Language to its child, and it was totally a blind study. So a non-human animal learned our American Sign Language from another non-human animal. So, I mean, you can see that these animals have abilities that we can't even imagine. I mean, just for them to be able to talk to us in our language, and we have no idea really how to talk to them in their languages. The research is really out there in favor that these animals are just highly intelligent.
But why just some animals and not all animals?
Some animals are, because this is the way he felt he could start his case. This was the best way that he could begin, was with animals that have high cognitive abilities that are able to be equated to ours within a court system.
And do you think we gain anything as a society by recognizing animals as persons?
Yes.
What do we gain?
Well, I think a whole new kind of time is coming for the culture, for the world culture in a way. And I think that in a generation or two, we'll stop eating animals because it's too expensive. And we'll have ways of imitating animal foods, and people will get used to it. And it'll leave our incredible curiosity open to finding out what animals know that we ought to know. How we'll learn to communicate with them in far more useful ways than we now have. So I think it's going to change. Our relationship with animals is going to change, and they'll be perceived really as fellow inhabitants of the planet rather than things that were just useful to us.
You know, some people say that there are other people around the world who live in really terrible conditions, probably some conditions worse than animals, I guess, in North America. So why focus on animals and not on human beings?
Yeah.
Well, I think any time you focus on injustice, it spreads like measles, and it's hard to contain it. And it spreads to where people are treated unjustly, easily as much as animals. So that I think it's a worthy. We know that churches for years have been, used the idea of confronting injustice, and sometimes they don't do it very well, and they do it only for certain people. The idea of an unjust culture around the world is such an amazing idea that you long to see it.
Chris, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think, by giving rights to the rightless, whether they're animals or humans, to giving protections to one doesn't exclude the other. And I think by raising our caring of non-human animals can also include raising our concerns for the rest of humanity.
Well, thank you very much for being on the agenda.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.